welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. I'm a teacher and author, and this is English Nerd. So today I'm going to talk about the 6th chapter of The Picture of Dorian Gray. It's a short chapter, and this is going to be a short video as well. Basically, it is Basil's reaction to hearing the news of Dorian Gray's engagement. So the past couple videos about Dorian Gray have been about his romance with Sybil Vane, the actress who does Shakespeare in a little kind of dingy theater. But Dorian is absolutely smitten. So in this chapter, it opens with Lord Henry Wotton, who is also called Harry, and Basil Hallward. And Harry is telling Basil about Dorian's engagement to Sybil Vane. Basil is not pleased by this for a couple reasons, I think. One, it's quite clear that Basil is in love with Dorian throughout the entire novel, so it's never outright stated, but there are all kinds of little clues and things throughout. At the time this was written, in the late 1800s, it was not an acceptable thing to be outwardly overtly gay, even though Oscar Wilde himself was. Anyway, if you watch my first video, you'll see he got in some significant legal trouble for that. So that is one reason, I think the main reason why Basil is so distressed at the news of Dorian's engagement. The second reason that he's really upset seems to me that Dorian has chosen not only Sybil Vane over him, but he's also chosen Lord Henry over him as well. Lord Henry knows all about the engagement, and Basil didn't hear from Dorian about it at all. He hears from Lord Henry, so he realizes very clearly in this chapter that his allegiance to Dorian is not reciprocated. Instead, Dorian has chosen Lord Henry instead. In previous videos, I describe Lord Henry and Basil as sort of the angel and devil on Dorian's shoulders, or another way to look at it would be the id and then the superego, kind of the conscience, and then the, base appetites and that kind of thing. So Dorian has definitely chosen the id, the devil side, and poor Basil is just left behind. Also, he's concerned for Dorian because this engagement happens so quickly. He thinks, who is this girl? Is she good enough for Dorian? Because of course, Basil thinks the world of him. In fact, Basil says, "I hope the girl is good, Harry. I don't want to see Dorian tied to some vile creature who might degrade his nature and ruin his intellect." To which Henry replies, "Oh, she is better than good. She's beautiful." So throughout this entire thing, there is a lot of consideration of beauty and the place of beauty, especially in contrast to goodness and truth and things like that. This was a topic that preoccupied Oscar Wilde himself. He was a founder of aestheticism, the idea that pleasure, that beauty was foremost, even above goodness and things like that, or it was itself a type of goodness. So it seems to me, I could be wrong, but it seems to me that he's considering through these different characters the legitimacy of that position, the strength of it, the limits of it, if there are limits. So she's beautiful, that's enough, Henry says. And then he claims that Basil's portrait of Dorian Gray, which of course is very important to the story, it's what it's named after, has made Dorian appreciate beauty more. So he's almost saying, this is your fault, Basil, for awakening him to the joys of beauty. So he's found himself this very beautiful girl, and they're going to marry. Remember, they're both very young too. Dorian is just shy of 21, and Sybil is 17 or 16, 17, she's in there. All right, Lord Henry, just to kind of summarize, because there are some great lines in here. Oscar Wilde is always quotable, but really the action is fairly simple. Henry goes on to say that Dorian is going to be a wonderful study. Anything that Dorian does, Henry treats as if he's some kind of experiment that he is able to control and guide and observe. Dorian is just this fascinating person to Lord Henry, so he's happy to mess with him, kind of pressure him in certain directions, observe his inclinations and all of this. Basil, being the very decent person that he is, wants Dorian to be happy, to be good, to be well, to be with people who care about him, and those two contrasting ideas come into distinct conflict here in chapter 6. Midway through the conversation, Dorian himself arrives, and Basil calls him out on choosing Harry over himself. He says, "I hope you will always be very happy, Dorian," said Basil Hallward, "but I don't quite forgive you for not having let me know of your engagement. You let Harry know." This is a moment where we see into Basil's heart and how he feels so hurt by Dorian choosing Henry over himself. Henry is not stupid. He is the opposite. He's a terrible person who is, in his own words, kind of the representative of sins that Dorian does not have the courage to commit, he says in this chapter. But he doesn't give Basil a break at all. Instead, he kind of pokes at that wound and emphasizes even more how much Dorian prefers Henry to Basil. There's a lot going on here that I don't think Dorian picks up on, because he's not quite as intelligent as either of the other two. Certainly not as Henry is. But just a couple things about the chapter that I want to highlight, and then that'll be it for this video. One, we see again in the way that Dorian recounts the story of his engagement, how to him Sybil Vane is not a person in her own right. She is the amalgamation of all of Shakespeare's heroines. She is this fantasy, she is this goddess, she is this person that he's really made up in his own mind rather than herself. That's obviously bad. But he does say that she elevates him. She makes him a better person. She makes him want to love, to be unselfish, to walk away from Henry's quote-unquote poisonous theories. It's interesting that Dorian recognizes that a lot of what Henry says is poisonous, but then he also pairs that with saying that they're delightful theories, and he doesn't know why he still likes Henry when Henry is terrible, overtly terrible. There's a brief conversation about what it means to be good. This is going to be a central question of the novel as well, because in chapter 2, Dorian sells his soul basically to be as beautiful and young as the portrait, whereas the portrait gets his soul. We don't see that yet, but we're going to see it very soon. So that idea of goodness, what is it, is an important one. So what we get is Henry's opinion. He says, to be good is to be in harmony with oneself. Discord is to be forced to be in harmony with others, one's own life. That is the important thing. And much like he has said in previous chapters, he implies that to be in harmony with oneself, one should indulge in what he calls quote-unquote beautiful sins. Basil is horrified by this. He says, well, that's terrible. If you pay a terrible price if you live only for yourself and you're not living on behalf of others, right? Because again, Basil's a decent guy. And Basil says, well, you pay for this kind of egotism and beautiful sinfulness in remorse, he says, in suffering, in, well, in the consciousness of degradation. Like, you're gonna pay for being a terrible, selfish person if that's the path that you choose, he says. And Henry just kind of waves him off and says, those are old-timey opinions. And Dorian keeps leaning into what Henry's saying and not what Basil's saying, because what Basil's saying is not, it's not sparkly, right? But what Henry's saying, although it is poisonous, is much sparklier, and so Dorian keeps listening to him. And then the chapter ends with all of them deciding to go to the theater. The two men who have not met Sybil Vane are going to see her act, and there is only room for 2 in the hansom cab, and Henry says, Basil, you can follow behind because Dorian and I will be taking the hansom cab. So if it were not clear enough that Basil is a third wheel, he is a third wheel. And the final paragraph is just this heartbreaking one where he's like, tearing up in the carriage that he's following them in. So I feel so bad for him here. Poor Basil. He's just officially shoved to the side. It's been happening. We've seen that it's been happening, but this is where Basil really understands where his relationship is with Dorian Gray, that he's this afterthought at this point, whereas before he was someone important. So poor Basil, things are shifting for the worse, and the next chapter is going to be a huge proof of that. All right, so if you are studying and reading The Picture of Dorian Gray, head on over to my website, carly-stevens.com. There's an entire teaching unit there, as well as the Dorian Gray Reader, which has paired readings. So all kinds of resources that you can check out there as this series continues to come out. Like this video if you like it, subscribe for more English nerdy goodness, and I'll see you next time. Bye.